So thank you all for coming. I'm excited. I'm Kathy Aubert and so delighted that you volunteered to be site coordinators for this workshop, Creating Inclusive Organizations Part 1. What I want to do, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, is just talk about what your role is, highlight anything that I wasn't clear about or you didn't understand. And so if you want in the Q&A or in the chat room, put any questions and I'll be glad to answer them. I hope you were able to collect up the different supplies that you'll need for this. If you're anticipating more than, say, 5 or 8 people, I hope you have just a little bit of chart paper. We're going to want like 1 for each group of 4. And markers, it'd be great if you had a marker for each person. That's for the activity where they're going to be drawing their vision, a symbol. You might have seen that. You also want to have maybe extra pens, blank name tags. So as you're greeting people or someone else is greeting them, they can just put a quick first name tag, maybe their pronouns they use. That would be great to invite them to do that. Also have a handout for each person. So in case you're like, what? If you go back to the thank you page where you saw the site coordinator information, if you just hit the worksheet, it's about a 28-page document. So if there's somebody that could go do that really quick right now, you still have 30 minutes, but make one of those for every person you're expecting. I think those are most of the supplies I think you'll need. If you have copies of your organizational vision, there's a part in the workshop where I use another vision statement of what is social justice. You could ignore that, and for those 3 to 4 minutes, have people look at your organization's vision and notice what stood out to them, what they liked about it, what they'd want to add. A couple times I'll probably encourage you to pull the same group back together, maybe for the Part 2 Virtual Institute or the Part 2 webinar. And that you can either get as recordings or do live, if I'm doing them live. And so if you don't have the vision statement this time, you could have it next time, just to remind people what we're about. So I think that's the logistics. Your key role is several parts. One is, I will clearly run the workshop, but I'll say the first one, passion. What's your passion? Please get into groups of 2, so get a partner, maybe somebody you don't know, and talk about X. I'll have a slide that'll say, site coordinator, can you please help people move into partners? And in 2 minutes, prompt them so that the other partner has airtime. That's the biggest role of yours, is just to help people move along and get all voices in. There'll be 8 to 10 times I'm going to ask you to maybe lead a quick discussion. It might be 2 minutes, it might be 4 or 5. And as you're doing that, if you could be watching who's already said something, so that you say, ooh, just a minute, and you go to somebody else. And if nobody else is talking, you say, I'd love some new voices. If nobody's talking, you could say, turn and talk to a partner. So even if I say brainstorm, if nobody's brainstorming, just put them back into a partner. And people, your group might be more reflective learners, or they may not feel a safe environment to have a conversation. So adjust however you want. The most you're going to have people in groups, or you're going to be debriefing, is 3 to 5 minutes, but it's probably 6 or 7 times. The one activity I do want to remind you of or highlight, because we'll be learning the MCOD model, Multicultural Organizational Development. I'll do that through sharing information, and then I'll have them teach each other, stages 2, 3, and 4. And then I'll teach 5. And then we're going to ask them to literally go move. You think we're exclusionary, stage 1, 2, club, 3, compliance, 4, affirming, 5, redefining or inclusion. There's really no 6th stage. It's aspirational, according to one of the key authors. So you'll be wanting to think about where in the room would you want each group to move. Now, if you have 10 people and they're sitting around one of those big tables, you may just want them to move to a different place of the table, so they don't have to be moving against the wall. But if you have 15 to 20, there's really, or 80, however many you have in the room, there's real power to having people move, and where they're using a wheelchair, or where they're getting up and walking, or using a walker to go be. And they could be there 10 minutes, especially if you're using the recording. I would have that activity more like 20 minutes, and I'll probably have it 5 to 7. So you want to have people close to chairs if they're not already using one, so that they, like me, I can stand a few minutes, but then I'm like, I want to be sitting down. So just be thoughtful about how you do that activity. Another thing about that activity is this is probably the more higher risk activity of this workshop, and actually some of the workshops that I'll be teaching this year, because you might have a whole hierarchy of folk in the room. Then you have different group identities in the room, privileged and marginalized. And so we're doing it about 2.5 hours in. So hopefully I'll be helping to create a learning container of more trust, honesty, bravery. And it could be hard to be the only person standing in exclusion stage 1 when you look over and your supervisor is in stage 4 affirming. That's happened in my workshop. So just know that's possible. And it could be the other way around, that your senior leaders are saying, we are in a club, and some of the new people in the organizations thinks we're a 4 or 5. So nothing right or wrong, but there'll be dissonance, sorry, is the only word I can come up with. They'll be kind of like a little bit more, because it's the level of honesty that's potential. If you're feeling that the people you know are coming are not ready to physically move and have a visual where they are, here's another way you can do it. You could leave people where they're sitting, and by then there'll probably be 3 to 5 times I've said, when I count to 3, 0 to 10, call out a number. Now, in this case, it'll be 1 through 6. And so you can say, instead of us moving, what I'd like us to do is, when I say 3, either use your fingers to, I think we're a 4 or a 2 or 1. I think we're a 5. Or you can say it. And you can do both. And so on the count of 3, now let them look at the indicators again, and then call out. And then you be listening really carefully. If you have a co-site coordinator, maybe have you all say, I heard several 3s, kind of a 4 affirming, a couple 2s. Did you hear anything different? If you think the group can do it, you can ask the group, what did you all hear? But again, that raises the ante just a little bit. So I want to encourage you to meet people where they are, and not put people in dangerous positions where, if they're going to get honest about this exclusion organization, that they're the only one standing there, and you don't think that is a useful, because the organization, the leaders aren't ready to have that, or there's going to be retributions. Because if you are a stage 1 or 2 and you're doing this this virtual institute, it may not be a safe space to be brave and honest. And people might have said to you, oh no, I want to have the conversation. So weigh all of that as you decide. And I only say that, small sliver of a chance, because I think as you get there, you don't have to decide till we're there. And you can just feel the room, and you're like, you know what? I think people will move, because people will take care of themselves. Even if they think you're at minus, a 2, kind of close to 1.5. As they look around, they're like, I'm going to stand an early 3, because this group's not ready to hear my truth. So I believe people will take care of themselves, and I want you to have that option. This is a pretty full virtual institute. We'll do a break halfway through. It's going to be a working break, most likely. So I'll have people in a pair. So if they want to talk a little longer, and then I'll give a full 10 minutes. So a couple minutes in the pair, and then a full 10 minutes. I think that's it. I'll be using Tinkerbell to bring us back. I'll probably do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to have us come back. So if you're live, unfortunately, you'll miss stuff if you want to keep going, but then you could buy the recording and then just bring people back together. If you're doing the recording, we're doing it in a way that my timing, I'm trying to get things into 3 hours. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I got people coming, but you can stretch stuff. So what you'll do is you'll use the recording, pause. I'll say for 5 minutes, but if you're into it, or if you're like, it only took 3, you'll figure it out. You can always email me if you have questions. And again, if you're doing this live, we'll be chat. I have somebody helping me with the Q&A and making notes. So if you need something, they can respond if I don't pay attention till a break. Whenever you're in small groups, I'll be trying to look at the chat, and I'll do my best. So thank you for leading. Thank you for pulling people together. We need millions more folk. And so thanks for doing your part to get more people empowered, skilled up to create greater equity, inclusion, social justice. If we all are doing our part, I believe we're making a difference. So we will see you in a few moments. And with that, I think you probably have 15, 20 minutes before we start. So thanks for greeting people, helping them get settled, introducing them to people, getting the handout, all those good sorts of things you do as a workshop facilitator. All right. Thanks for site coordinating. All the best. Hello and welcome to Creating Inclusive Organizations, Part 1. I'm Kathy Aubert with the Center for Transformation and Change, and I'm delighted you've joined us today. I use she, her pronouns, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the original custodians of this land, the Arapaho here in Denver. We're going to be talking about how to deepen your capacity and everyone in your organization to have the readiness and the courage to create inclusive organizations. And I'll talk about the 3 phases of organizational change that can help people start where you are and move them to the greater capacity, infuse it, everything you do. We'll be using the 6-stage model, multicultural organizational development from Jackson Hardiman. In fact, in Part 1, you will learn this model, I hope well enough that you can teach people literally as you're in a carpool or sitting waiting, watching your kids play volleyball or something. It's all intended to help mobilize all the leaders, all the employees of your organization to create energy, commitment, and vision to be able to create more inclusive, socially just organizations that not only meet the needs of all of our clients and customers, but really support the needs of our staff, employees, everyone, so they can do their best work, best service. You know, across the nation, I'm feeling increased energy mobilization of people in organizations and also in society here in the U.S., a renewed sense of commitment to what we believe is possible, how we want to have a nation, a world, and we want to live up to the mission statements and the values that we say we're about, but we're finding this huge gap between where we are and where we want to be. And if I'm right, today in Arizona, teachers and supporters are marching and walking out to say we have a vision of how we want to have our young people, but we cannot provide that with the current environmental hostility towards teachers, the environmental degradation of our classrooms and our educational systems. And that's happening in college campuses, other K-12 organizations here in Colorado. There's a huge march happening as well. Nonprofits, corporations, many people are saying enough is enough. There's this huge difference between the lived experiences of our clients and our staff and leaders and where we say we want to go. So we're looking at the culture and the climate, but there are also structural changes. People are noticing the demographic shifts of those we're serving as well as those we want to attract and retain, and maybe they're in our organizations. And one of the critical pain points for me is the utter lack of competence of leaders and staff to effectively create policies, programs, and services that really meets the needs of those we're serving and creates an inclusive environment so people can do their best work. We're just not living up to what we say we need to do. And if it's not a core moral imperative in your organization, then you can be looking at your financials and how they're doing and who are your future customers and can you really hold and attract them with the current organizational dynamics. Many leaders are recognizing we're not where we need to be, but they feel stuck and they realize we haven't been here for a long time and we've been talking about these issues for a long time now. How many folk in your organization have surveys, whether they're climate surveys, customer satisfaction surveys, employee surveys, that you have in notebooks just like this holding up the shelves of a bookcase? But we haven't really looked at them recently, and we're not using them to move forward. There are people in your organization, some that have left, that have been trying to raise these issues for a long time. And so in this virtual institute, I want to give you some of the tools and skills to increase your capacity, whether you go back and look at some of these surveys, whether you gather more current information to keep the momentum going. Because what happens is often there's a critical incident. If you're in higher ed, you're noticing in Syracuse right now and many other campuses, Cal Poly, just a couple weeks ago, another racist critical incident in Syracuse was incredible disability oppression, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, as well as racism, and I could keep going. There were actually 2 videos. And so their leaders are moving very quickly, but also my guest is feeling really this incredible, strong environmental press to create meaningful change so that these sorts of situations don't happen. And if they do, we respond more quickly, effectively. How are we supporting the staff and faculty who are working with students who are feeling isolated in a hostile environment? And what often happens, whatever, higher ed, K-12, corporations, nonprofits, you have all this energy for whatever reason, and as soon as the news media leaves, people graduate, somebody leaves the organization, or it's summer, and then the energy wanes. And so working with multicultural organizational development, this model and a lot of other tools I'll share in part 1 and part 2, you and your organization can create an understanding of what's the current state, and then how do we move forward. And so that's what I want to do today. But individually, you could look at this model and just say, we're a stage 4, we're a stage 2. No, I think we're stage 1, but that's not what's necessary. Only we have to then have authentic dialogue, and that's what we do in this workshop, to first learn the model and say, where are we? What is our current climate and culture through an inclusion lens? And to be open to hearing other people's perspective, particularly if you're in the privileged group and they're in the corresponding marginalized or have several marginalized identities. Or they have a privileged identity and they've done a lot of work and they've been listening hard and they've been doing research. So we have to have authentic conversations so we can create inclusive organizations and have the leaders effectively empower others to implement meaningful, sustainable, systemic organizational change. Now, if you've been around as long as I have, you know that change takes time, or at least today it does seem to be. Some of my early mentors talked about the true culture change is a long-term investment, 7, 10, 12 years. And in my 30s, when I heard that, I just resisted that. I was not willing to hear that because I was still wanting to change now. And while I did, I think successfully with their consulting group and in my own consulting work, help organizations change, particularly at the individual and group level, what I'm really learning as I'm now 61 is that there are many components that have to be in place consistently, pervasively, and strong accountability. So we'll be talking about that some today, but particularly in part 2, because the end goal is to get everyone in the organization clear expectations for change, skilled up, held accountable to infuse equity inclusion into everything they do, policies, programs, decisions, all interactions. And we're holding everyone accountable to do their part to create meaningful change now and planning it for the future. So our format is I'll be leading you through some activities because this particular workshop has some content to learn the model. More than my other workshops, I'll be giving you some material in a lecture story form, and then you'll get a chance to learn the model. We'll break halfway through, and feel free to take care of yourself in between. You can be drinking and eating and then go release what you got to release, and then just come on back into the workshop. I want to acknowledge that you have a site coordinator, and could the site coordinator, if you have 2 or 3, kind of wave or say hello to folk if you haven't made yourselves known already. And what I'm excited about is being able to do live workshops that can literally go out literally across the world. Right now, I think we're only in the US. And then people that purchase the recording can then just keep using this throughout their organization. But you will always have to have people in the room. And the site coordinators today, their role will be to move people into and out of activities, and they'll be debriefing probably 6 to 8 times. And if you have questions, especially during the break, you can ask them. There's a chat room on this Zoom, as well as a Q&A. If at any point you have a question for me or something you want me to know, please just put it in. Every time you're in a small group, I'll be looking at those and I'll be responding, but you can also influence me a bit if you have things that you want me to be focusing on maybe sooner than I had planned. Today, in your small groups and in your large groups, I hope you'll really work within learning guidelines that'll promote learning for everyone. So participate fully and stretch yourself past your comfort zone, maybe 1 or 2 more steps, open, honest communication, really listening deeply, harder if you disagree. That's number 4 from sustained dialogue. That's where I got that. And in your small groups and large groups, please be noticing who's been in and not been in, and really moving in and out and inviting people in that maybe haven't shared so that we get many perspectives in. Stay as fully present as you can. I know if there are emergencies and you've got your cell phone on because you have to have it. But if you don't expect emergencies, can you just have it so that you don't even look at it except at the break. That would really help you be present so that you can hear different perspectives from me, from the material, from your colleagues. And then we'll be talking about the impact of a lot of dynamics. And it's important to maybe acknowledge the intent, but it's much more important to acknowledge and explore the unintended impact. Those may happen in small groups, and you may want to use some of your time to do that. Again, this is only a 3-hour workshop, so you may also want to come back together if there is a microaggression, an unintended comment, and you want to come back or one-on-one, have a follow-up later. Please lean into your discomfort, engage, be brave, take risks, and also commit to confidentiality. If you're in a small group or even a large group debrief and you want to notice a dynamic in the group or say, what we're talking about, I see happening in our organization, so the skill to be able to describe, I call it panning, pay attention now. You may or may not want to share if you ever have an unexpected wave of emotion, but I do want you to pay attention if you feel triggered. Especially as we get into the latter half of this 3-hour workshop, we'll have a chance for everyone to share where they think the current organization is. And if you think we're very early in the stage model around a 2 or a club, you may be remembering stories that have you full of disappointment or frustration or fear that you're some of the people perpetuating these uninclusive dynamics. And so just be aware of your emotions during this. If you want to share them, I think that's wonderful. And this is a full 3-hour workshop. And so just know that I trust you'll take care of yourself. And if you want to name your emotions or name if you're feeling triggered, we can hold the container for that and always come back and have that conversation at another time if we run out of time. And I believe in even these virtual workshops, if you trust through dialogue, you will leave with deeper understanding, deeper connection in your community. You'll see people with greater capacity you want to keep learning from as we just really engage, embrace, and leap. That's my hope. And we'll come back to these because I want you to think about how they help with organizational change, but I want to at least name them as we're creating the container for learning. And if you do feel triggered, that unexpected wave of emotion, a hot button, there are a number of things you can do. You can make some notes about what that's about. I was so deeply triggered on Monday. I was a participant in a workshop, and I haven't been that deeply triggered in a long time. And the person wouldn't let me come in, and I honored their leadership for a moment. They said they'd bring me in a moment. So I just spent the time journaling, and it was very helpful because I went from a way high, way beyond plus 10 down. I de-escalated enough so I could think clearly enough. I was still way triggered. I wish I'd had a half hour to de-escalate, but I came back in, was able to engage. So in this workshop, you may want to, like I just did, take a deep breath. You may want to go get a drink of water, hit the restroom, or you may want to let folks know that's hitting me wrong, or I'm just feeling a reaction to what you just said. You don't have to use the word trigger, but at a minimum, I want you to be paying attention to yourself, and you can also raise it. The first activity I want us to do is to reflect right now is what is the source of your passion, your commitment for creating inclusive organization that accelerates the persistence and success. You can tell I like blue, and you can tell that I like to highlight the words I like. Full range of employees. And I mean full across full breadth of differences. So this isn't just interrupting a microaggression, which is necessary but not sufficient. This is about organizational culture, climate, policies, practices that accelerates the capacity of all of our employees to be successful in their full range of differences. So what's the source of your passion? And to create inclusive policies, practices, programs, services that meets the needs of the full breadth of those you serve today and want to be serving. And so I'm just going to invite you to just take a quiet moment, and I'm going to be asking the psych coordinators here in a moment to move you into a partner. So you may want to just lean over to somebody. You're just be in twos, and so I want to make sure you have the questions. And then psych coordinators, if you could, move people into twos. You'll have about 2 minutes each, actually, looks like, to share. I want you to listen intently. This isn't a, ooh, yeah, but let me tell you mine. It's letting the person, just holding that space for them. And then psych coordinators in about 2 minutes, just prompt them to let them know that it's time to move on. So in about 3 minutes, you'll see a slide that says 1 more minute. And in 4 minutes, I'll come on back in. Thank you.
Kathy, you have a request to just go back one slide, please.
Five, four, three, two, one. So everybody take a deep breath. What I'd like you to do is just scan your body. Just go through and notice your feelings, your thoughts, and your physiological reactions from having talked about passion for about 4 or 5 minutes. Just notice. And just kind of give a nod or uh-huh if you're noticing you might be feeling more energized, maybe more connected to yourself and to the person you were talking to. here's what I know when I do this in my workshops that were in front of people, almost everyone is like, yeah, we need to get connected to our passion, why this is important to us, and then share it with others so that we stay energized for the long haul. And to get everyone around us recognizing their reason, passion, commitment, whatever word works for them, and talking about it regularly so that together we can continue making movement. Now I'm going to keep you in your same group, same partner, and I want you to reflect and then share about, just with your partner, what do you see occurring or not in the organization, locally in the region, nationally, internationally, that makes this session important in your opinion to create inclusive organizations, socially just organizations for the employees as well as those we serve. So just take a moment to reflect, and it may help to have the conversation like how far we've come, here's what I'm noticing, and here's how far we need to go. So just take about 20, 30 seconds if you want in a pair. But if you're both ready to start talking, if you're both extroverts, go ahead. But my guess is you may want just a moment to make a note or just to reflect. So just take a moment to reflect. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And I'm thinking site coordinators, watch your group, but the first 2 or 3 in pairs. And then I think it would be fun to hear out a few responses from different participants. And so, scan the room by different group identities and see if there's 1 or 2 or 3 people that want to share what they're noticing or maybe what they're feeling about why this topic is critical for your organization in this moment in time. So 5 minutes, pairs, go ahead and start talking. And then site coordinators, bring them back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath. And just notice how you're feeling as maybe some of your colleagues shared information or shared perspectives that was different from your opinion, or maybe some new information. We'll just keep doing more of that, and it's critical as we keep going. As we work together as leaders and staff to really create greater inclusion, it's critical we keep focusing on not only where we need to go, but how far we've come. We have to celebrate the progress and do both progress and steps we still need to take. And if you're thinking about looking at the readiness of your organization or readiness of different people in your organization, to be really focused on, if there's someone that's only focused on how far we've come and that's all they talk about, they're probably not ready for the level of work we're going to be doing today. And if they're only focused on how far we need to go, they may not be ready to engage in authentic, real dialogue, productive conversations with people who could be in many different places with different perspectives. I think we need change agents, leaders who can do both at the same time. Recognize progress and also recognize how far we need to go, and to be able to hold all of that while keeping the focus on how far we need to go. And even these two questions can be ways to anticipate and gauge the resistance. If you only talk about how far we need to go in subsequent meetings and workshops, folks will probably resist if they don't also have a place to share and acknowledge and appreciate all that's been done, all the work that we're building on to keep moving. It's a change management strategy. And so how do you feel knowing that others are looking to you, whatever your role in the organization, to lead meaningful, sustainable organizational change? I want you to reflect individually for a moment. And then I'm just going to ask that the site coordinators just maybe hear out a couple comments. How do you feel knowing? I know when I was working internally, now that was over 30, 35 years ago, I felt pressure and responsibility to create an environment where people felt valued and respected. Now, my behavior was violating my values, let me be very clear, but I thought I was a well-intended person doing the right thing. I just didn't know enough at the time. But I did feel responsible. So site coordinators, why don't you just take a moment and just hear 2 or 3 people. Take a deep breath. How do you feel knowing others are and will increasingly be looking to you to lead sustainable organizational change? Just about a minute. Let me invite you to come on back. Take a deep breath and just keep breathing through the whole workshop. I believe what we've been doing in our organization is necessary, but nowhere close to sufficient for the type of organizational change that will really help you meet your vision and goals. And to get all of your employees and all your leaders to really see that we need to have skills not only in the individual level, but the group and organization. I'm going to show you a couple metaphors. I like the trifocal metaphor. One, because I now wear trifocals. And literally, if you're in front of me and we're working together, you'll see me kind of look up so that I can look at you directly. But then if I'm reading something, I'll be looking somewhere else. And if I'm walking, I'll look somewhere else. When we're creating organizational change, we have to see people as individuals. And that's where most people have some capacity. They might know about their own group memberships or their own biases, and so they're trying to not act on those. They're paying attention maybe to their own behavior. They're trying to be a good leader, good colleague. But you cannot do that if you don't also get group level, if you don't know the common patterns of microaggressions and unproductive organizational dynamics that negatively undermine the success of people in marginalized identities, unfairly privileged people in privileged identities. If we're not noticing the daily microaggressions, the pervasive policies and practices, and if we're not skilling people up to interrupt, especially at the interpersonal level and the group level. So skills like that we covered in the microaggressions work, tracking, panning, the dynamics, the tools to speak up in ways that are effective. So skilling people up to do that. Knowing who your customers are by group membership, their level of satisfaction, what their needs are, what their experiences are in the community and nationally. All that is critical to know, but it's not sufficient unless you're doing what we're working on today at the organizational level. And that's the whole part of this workshop as well as part 2. So how do you empower, mobilize, get everyone skilled up to create policies, practices, and services that truly meet the needs of the full breadth, and they're using an equity, inclusion, social justice lens in everything they do? That's what we're doing, all 3 levels. Now, the metaphor of a pyramid might work as you're trying to think about it right now in the workshop, or how are you going to share this with your team, your colleagues, your board? The individual level, it's kind of easy to see almost every block. And so it's like, okay, I kind of know what I need to do after some basic foundational diversity training. But if we aren't paying attention at the group level, you might notice there are a lot of blocks you can't see. And while I think the work that people are asking me and others to do is at the group level, microaggressions, skills to intervene, understanding differences, what are our group memberships, privileged, marginalized dynamics. That's critical work, but I see most organizations are doing one-off trainings and they're stopping there. We need systemic cultural competency development of everyone at the individual and group and at the organizational level, so that people can recognize the air we breathe, the water we're swimming in that we don't even notice because it just feels normal. And yet what feels normal, as in our daily way we do business, was set up by people usually in privileged identities, maybe unconsciously, to support us and our success. And anyone that's in or has come to the organization since then has a very different experience. And so others may see those first blocks at the bottom, our mission, our value statement, what's on our website. We might have all kinds of pictures that show our commitment to diversity and our non-discrimination policy. And all that is necessary, but not sufficient. And it can mask what's really going on and send a distorted view. And so the work we'll be doing today, and then you can literally do every activity we're doing today with others in your organization to really look at the climate, the culture, the daily work environment, which are those blocks that are hidden underneath all that we really can't see unless you intentionally make them more aware. And so the 3 phases of institutional change. The source of this for me was Elsie Y. Cross Associates. Elsie Y. Cross was an African-American woman, 40 to 50 years ago, was doing work particularly around gender and race in the beginning. Managing diversity was a term she coined and really was cutting edge before corporations were doing this work. And they had a systemic way to help organizations move through effectively. And so in this workshop, we're going to be focusing much more on phase 1. How do you increase the awareness of leaders, mid-level managers, employees of what the current state is, and increase their commitment to want to create greater inclusion? In part 2, we'll be talking about how do you build the internal capacity of key leaders, internal change agents, and all employees everywhere they are, so they are better able to recognize and interrupt microaggressions and change policies and practices, help change the culture, so that they're ready in phase 3 to be held accountable to infuse equity inclusion into everything we do. And by then, you're hiring, promoting, recruiting in ways to get people in and to develop them and to help people leave who aren't on board. That's what phase 3 looks like, and we'll do that in part 2. And so in phase 1, we're really again focused on the key aspects of increasing awareness and commitment. And one of the first is, how do you create a shared understanding of your vision of what you want the organization to be, as well as discussing and getting closer to understanding collectively. Notice I'm not saying agree exactly, because there might be a few different perspectives on what equity, inclusion, social justice mean. But in trainings, workshops, retreats, to have the conversations, and not just off the people's top of their head, but in a foundational day-long training to really learn these tools and skills around equity inclusion. By the way, I'll be doing those in the next 2 months, 3 months, June and July. Some of my favorite equity inclusion workshop activities. But once people have the foundation, then to have the real conversation, well, what does equity mean for us, inclusion? And if the term social justice is one you want to use, I use social justice, equity, inclusion pretty much the same. Some people differentiate. I don't care what word people use, as long as we're looking at privilege, marginalization, power dynamics, shifting those, and really creating an inclusive organization where people feel valued, respected, and can perform to their best, highest potential. And so I'm going to lead you through a couple activities to show you not only now to start that conversation, but also how you can have it in the fuller organization. So a colleague of mine, Vernon Wall, told me this story a number of years ago about the difference between equal and equitable. He said equal means everybody gets shoes. And at first I was nodding my head, yeah, that seems fair. But then he said equitable means everyone gets shoes that fit. And I really noticed that I was thinking equal and equitable were the same. And I hear people all the time, well, I just treat everybody the same. And it's like, no. People have different needs. They have different life experiences. There's different experiences of oppression or privilege in an organization, which then has different outcomes that are needed. Our customers often have different needs. And if you are literally in a for-profit organization or even K-12 higher ed, even nonprofit, you are serving customers. Now, some may not be paying you, but you are serving them, and my guess is you're really trying to differentiate what will help each customer get their needs met and have success. Equitable. Now, I've added to this, have shoes that fit and match your style. Because if you put me in high heels, that does not work for me. Or if you give me shoes that are pink, that work for me. So I need, and I believe people deserve, that fit their needs and their style. I'm half tongue-in-cheek, but not really. And so again, in foundational trainings, you can have activities and conversations, but let me have you all do this. We have to be able to talk about, what does equity, diversity, inclusion mean in your organization? And while I'm not going to have you right now talk about it, because literally this could be a 30, 50, 2-hour conversation, or even several parts, where people may have a conversation, go off, read some things, come back. I created something that was in addition to the webinar, just to offer you a way to start thinking about, what does it mean for me, and what do I think it means up from others? And you can be thinking about different leaders, different segments of your organization. So would people say this means you are welcome here? No, come on, welcome, come on. Or really more, and we treat everyone equally here. That's what it means, everyone. Or we create a welcoming environment. That's what we're about. That's what it means to us. You can probably tell with my tone, these are not enough in my opinion. We want everyone to have a sense of belonging. Most organizations I get hired for, this is where they're moving towards. They may not be there yet, but that's where they are. And then I want to ask them, so what do you do so we can support the success of everyone? And so does your organization say, we do what we can and need to support everyone's success? Or does equity, inclusion, social justice for your organization mean today we intentionally work to accelerate the success of all our employees and those we're serving? We intentionally remove barriers, obstacles, hurdles. Is that what you're currently saying and doing? Is that what it means? Now, it also could be your stretch goal, but it would mean leaders saying, this is what we're about, this is our vision. Are your leaders saying, we require everyone to increase capacity to infuse equity, inclusion into everything they do? And our vision and our values and mission is we're skilling up everyone to hold, and we hold them accountable. Dismantle institutional oppression wherever it is. Dismantling and disrupting the dynamics of privilege, the dynamics of marginalization in all policies, programs, services, practices, climate, culture. And so just reflect for a moment. What would your organization be saying? What I'm going to have you do is begin to talk about your vision in a different way, but I hope that began to get you a little warmed up to go, I wonder what mine is, because that's what you're going to get a chance to share. So given your role, what is your vision for an organization that you're in? The equitable, inclusive, and if you like the term, socially just. I love that term, but some organizations are not ready for that. And I believe in meeting people where they are so we can move them. So what is your vision of what you're trying to create? What I'd like you to do is first consider one, and I believe it's in your packet on page 1 on the cover, down at the bottom. These are some of my mentors, and this book, Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice, has incredible resources for teaching and training about equity, inclusion, social justice, if you're looking for more resources. But as I read this, just take a moment and see what words stand out to you, what words are making sense to you. Adams Bell Griffin defines social justice as both a process and a goal. The goal of social justice is full, equal participation of all groups in a society, organization that is mutually shaped to meet their needs. I love that one. Social justice includes the vision of a society, an organization that is equitable and all members are physically and psychologically safe and secure. So just take a moment and just reflect on that. And reflect what words stood out to you, because I'm going to ask your psych coordinator to just kind of hear out 2 or 3 people. I am learning to go back a slide. So psych coordinator, just a moment, a minute or so, and invite folks to share if there was a phrase that stood out and why, or is anything missing from their perspective. Just take a minute to do that. Actually, 2 or 3 minutes. Go ahead. Five, four, three, two, one. So whether you look at this vision, or as you're moving forward and you're bringing more people in this conversation, you may want to bring your own vision statement in, that of peer organizations. If you have some organizations your leaders aspire to be more like or believe that do really great work that they want to emulate more, pull in their vision statements. And if it were me, I'd bring in a couple that I think are really good, even if no one's ever heard of the organization. And you could have people review them before a meeting and come together and talk about, just like we did, what stood out to you and why. And this can help an organization, the leaders warm up. If you have an inclusion change team or diversity council working with leaders, and your next step is develop a vision. But if you already have one, just get re-grounded in it and getting people committed to talking about it. What I'd like to do next is have you individually just reflect for a moment and note at least one way you're already intentionally doing something to create greater equity, inclusion, social justice, greater fairness. You're changing a policy, you're implemented a training, your hiring practices you've shifted, you're noticing and claiming microaggressions and interrupting them. So just take a moment, because I'm going to have you share this in a small group in a minute, but just reflect, what are you already doing to intentionally create more inclusion? Just take a moment to reflect. And site coordinators, this could be a time if you have charts and markers, kind of set them up so maybe they'd be 4 and 5 people in a small group, or if you're using paper, just kind of have it available and the markers or pens available. So now what I ask you to do is take those notes with you, but I'd like on your own or site coordinators to move into small groups and maybe have some differences across apparent differences or with people you don't usually work with or don't know as well. And 3, 4, 5, 6 people around a piece of chart paper, or if you're just 2 or 3 people around one 8x11, that's fine. And as you're getting organized, here's going to be your instructions. Some people learn really well from conceptually and talking, and others can really get deeper insight by doing something from the right side of their brain. And so I want to offer you a chance. You already had the chance to do more left side. I don't want to do right side. So what I need you to do, and I know this may be a stretch for some people, is I want you to think about a symbol or a picture that somehow represents a part of or your whole vision for what's an inclusive, socially just culture, work environment, inclusive organization. And if you're feeling stuck, you just close your eyes for a minute, take a deep breath, and say, what's an inclusive organization? See if a thought comes or a symbol. And if you're still stuck, look around the room or imagine where you live or even coming to work today. Imagine your office and see if anything just kind of pops out. I just look down and I have this is a snake image that I sometimes hold. And so I might draw this. And then in a moment I'll get to share why and how this has a piece of inclusion for me. And what just came to me, this is extroverting. Let me be very clear. I'm making this up as I go. That we need to be moving forward. And we may have to go to the left and to the right. It's not always on a straight line because snakes kind of move back and forth. But if they hit a bump or something that's kind of a crisis, they can pull back and then decide maybe they can go around. And so that's all I'm asking for, is some symbol that's a part of what's an inclusive organization. And I was kind of talking about the role of leaders, but also the organization. You may not get it always right or on point, but you just keep adjusting and you just keep moving to your goal. And if something critical happens, you can come back and just wait and see what's going on. And then as an organization, decide the best path to move forward. So see what a low bar I just set? So take a moment quietly, reflect, and when you're ready, you just start drawing a symbol or a picture. And then in a moment, I'm going to have you share. I hope that was enough time. And if you're still reflecting, you can be drawing as someone else shares, but somebody just start and say, I want you to share both. Highlight your symbol, your drawing, and what that is about. What's an inclusive organization? What does that mean to you? What does equity, inclusion mean to you? And then one specific way you already intentionally create greater social justice, inclusion, fairness, whatever language you're currently using. And so one person just kind of, doesn't matter the order, you can share what you're already doing, but it may make sense to say, here's my vision. Here's what I'm working to try to create. And here's one way I'm doing it. And so I'm going to leave you alone for about 4 to 5 minutes. So this is a quick share, maybe a minute each. And feel free to laugh along or really appreciate each other's drawing or notice how my drawing would not be very effective. So 4 or 5 minutes, go ahead. What I want to do now is have you think about the leadership case, or what some people call the business case. What's the compelling reasons that all leaders, employees need to create inclusive, equitable, socially just organizations and services? Now, some may come from it from a reputation perspective. We cannot hire or retain people. We cannot have our customers come to us and if we have a bad reputation, a racist reputation, say. Or we want to be able to recruit and retain. So we want to make sure our client and our culture is on people that come work. Best employer in this whole region. Another angle might be changing demographics. We cannot survive. We can't be viable. We cannot move into the future or expand if we aren't paying attention to equity, inclusion, and creating an inclusive environment. Some people might come from more of a missions values place. This is who we say we are. This is what I believe. It's the right thing to do. Others might be, I want to avoid a lawsuit. I don't want to be sued, or our creditors are really demanding we do this. So to be honest, I'm a practical, I want change. So whatever angle your leaders and your board, or if you have trustees or your accreditation folk, whatever they say, that's important to know. But for right now, I want you to get in touch with, for you, why is it important to you? Why do you want your leaders, all employees? So what's your compelling reason? And I'm going to give you a chance to reflect a moment, and then I'm going to ask the site coordinators just to collect up a couple voices for a few minutes. And so site coordinators, 3 to 4 minutes, just lead a group discussion, maybe 3 to 5 folks, and the prompt is at the bottom. Why is it important for leaders and employees? So what's your leadership case? And just see what different perspectives are. Make sure you hear and understand. Go ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath. It is critical that leaders and change teams have an honest conversation about the compelling reasons and why. It's a part of the vision, but that'll help keep the focus on where we're going and why. And I don't know if there's a wrong answer. I think all the ones that I highlighted, and my guess is all that you all shared, it's important to be able to understand each other's perspective to move forward. We need to have a shared understanding of what is the vision and values. What do we mean by equity, inclusion, social justice? And if we don't, then the people that are already on board and have their own vision will start moving, and they'll leave 3/4 of the organization behind, and then you'll get stuck and then not be able to move. And so while literally in this workshop, it may feel that you're like, can't we just get to it? That's how it feels in organizational change when you are in phase 1. You're doing foundational diversity awareness trainings. You're doing vision concepts, visioning. You're discussing what this means to people. Because if you don't have a nice critical mass of the leaders who are now passionate, their hearts are open, they understand the current climate and dynamics, and they want to make a difference, then they're just checking off a box. And as soon as some other thing comes up or their attention is driven elsewhere, all efforts will be, they won't be supported anymore. The money will disappear. People may not get hired into positions that are doing this work. You may not get to live there long. So this pre-work in phase 1 is critical. A tactical point, so this is kind of conversation, one that may feel a little more tactical, and this may feel like you're making movement to some people, is to have more conversations about how and when does your area already explicitly negotiate, agree to use those guidelines that we talked about earlier in meetings, every task force, and how we engage each other interpersonally as we're just walking down the hall. So they're not rules of engagement necessarily. They're community developed guidelines, principles of community. And I'll talk later in part 2 about ways to do that. What I'd like to invite you to do now, reflect on, wow, have we agreed to these and how could we? But the question I want you to do is almost a what if. What could be different if everyone engaged within the types of working agreements that I talked about before? What could be different? And I'm going to put the slide up of the working agreements. But imagine if people were participating fully and honestly and sharing airtime and naming triggers and leaning into discomfort and noticing the dynamics and naming them real time, etc. So let's take a moment to reflect. What could be different? And then site coordinators, I think I'm going to ask you to just collect up people's thoughts of which ones they're like, whoo, if we did this, this is what could be different. So everybody just reflect and make some notes just for a moment. So while people are still reflecting, site coordinators, if you just want to jump to what could be different and why, you can. If you want to take a moment, this is going to be more like 5 minutes, I think, to collect up a few quick examples of how people are already explicitly negotiating these type of working agreements. That could be helpful. But I really want the focus to be on what could be different if we all did number X. What could be different if we did something that's not even on this list, but what I want. So why don't you go ahead, 4 or 5 minutes now, just collect ups, have an engaged conversation. Try to get a lot of voices in. Go ahead. About 1 more minute. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. It is critical at phase 1 that leaders identify and discuss in a collaborative way what are the new behaviors, what are the expected behaviors, what's the new culture we want, what's our vision, and then begin to have people talk about that. How do we do that right now? And that while not every organization, every department may be able to do it, if the leaders agree to how they're going to engage each other, engage others, and then if they get maybe the whole organization identify community principles of community, and I'll show you that in part 2, then it's just one piece of phase 1 to raise awareness about where we are, where we want to go, and begin to think about how we want to get there. Part of that conversation is as you're meeting in task forces or one-on-one supervision or workshops, what do you want to be able to do when you feel triggered, and negotiating that. Now, this will be very scary if your organization is pretty early in the MCOD model that we're about to talk about. But as you're into stages 3, 4, and 5, it's a critical conversation to create a new way of engaging. Doesn't say it's going to happen well all the time, but we have to be setting the bar ahead. So we're at the organizational level, looking at culture, policies. That's where we're headed. And to help people begin to even envision phase 1 where we are, sometimes you can just ask this question: from not at all to completely, how equitable, inclusive, socially just is our current organizational culture climate for all members of the organization and for all those we serve? And you can give people a moment just to reflect, as I'm about to do. And then I'm just going to invite you to speak out. In a moment, I'm actually going to have the site coordinator just say 1, 2, 3, and you can either use your fingers and or use your voice or both to claim a number. And if you're not feeling brave that the container has been created, that you're like, I'm going to just, there's 30 people in the room here, I'm going to just, but I really want to encourage you to stretch and model authenticity. So 0 to 10. And so site coordinators, count to 3, invite people to hold up their fingers or call out their number, and then ask people to sort of scan the room, and then invite 3 or 4 or 5 6 folks in. I'm going to give you a total of 4 minutes. I'm going to put that slide back up so you have the question. But go ahead. You're about halfway. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. So my hope is throughout this workshop, you're individually making a greater commitment to be more honest and brave, and you're not only sharing, but to be honest and brave as you're hearing others and taking them in, because all voices are critical, because we each see maybe a different part of the organization, and together maybe we'll be better prepared to move forward. This question could actually just be the model. Where do you think you are and why? I think learning the model we're about to do really helps get similar terminology and concepts. And if you're somewhere where you don't have the 6 stages or you can't quite remember them and you don't have a handout or a PowerPoint, you could just ask this question: how equitable and inclusive do we think we are? And even this question: do all members feel valued, respected, and included, and how would we know? So those 2 questions could get many different parts of your organization reflecting, talking honestly, and one conversation is usually never enough, because particularly with this question, you want to be looking at data. You want to be, how would you know, to be looking at the different surveys or focus group data, the different examples and anecdotes and stories that maybe you've collected or heard. Again, never sharing names, but patterns of experience by group membership. And what are people just going through the organization? What is your gut saying as you're just noticing dynamics in meetings? Who's talking, who's not, sharing those. And clearly part of phase 1, and again, that's what we're doing here in part 2, someone asked, that will be phases 2 and 3 of organizational change and the details and strategies for that. HR statistics like who are we hiring by group membership? How long do they stay? What do the exit interviews say? Who's getting promoted by group membership? And I could keep going. To be able to look at performance management, what ratings are people getting by group membership, and how could our performance practices and our coaching practices inherently privilege groups and marginalized groups. So on the full breadth of differences at phase 1 awareness, that's what we're trying to look at. Not only the ones that you personally have passion about, but the full breadth of differences to get on your screen literally like they are now. And this is not a complete list, but it's a lot bigger than I can carry even in me. So I need lists like this. We'll talk about group identity cards. They're in your packet. That's an activity that can literally help people have in front of them all the different categories of difference that your organization is wanting to pay attention to. So it's not enough just to understand. It's not enough to want to change. to listen deeply. Those are necessary but not sufficient. We have to be able to persistently, actively be engaged in creating change. But this is often what happens in organizations. Yeah, I just make myself laugh. We feel stuck. We are stuck. And leaders are asking, well, what now? And often we just want to fix it and get a quick solution. And that's often dominant culture coming in. We're scared or anxious or urgent and feeling unsure, puzzled, confused, unclear, baffled, just wanting to know how to do it. And so this model I'm about to share, and we'll do a little bit before break, and then I'll after break, really provides for me a roadmap of where we are, where we're going. Like GPS, you can't use Waze if you don't put in where you are, and that's, GPS can figure that out, and then put in where you want to go, and then they find the best ways to go. And then you can look ahead to say, ooh, big accident there, so let's move around. So the MCOD model, the folks from University of Massachusetts Amherst, just dear friends and colleagues, Doctors Rita Hardiman, Evangelina Hovinu, who I don't know as well, but Rita and then Bailey Jackson, colleagues and friends of mine. I want to say 35, 40 years ago, were very involved in organizational development, and the National Training Lab, is my understanding, and doing their own work as consultants. They were faculty at UMass. And they realized that what we were teaching in organizational change and management and all that was assuming and not explicitly talking about equity inclusion. It was assuming everybody was the same and just teaching about what's good culture and what's good leadership, not acknowledging we're teaching white, male, heterosexual, probably able-bodied, cisgender, wealthy perspectives on what is good, and creating organizations to really meet the needs more of people with one or more of those privileged identities. And so they came up with a 6-stage model. It's a development model that helps us understand and talk about the current climate and culture and where we want to go. And you can use it to analyze and talk about where we are and what our vision is. So you've already talked about the vision, and I believe you'll find stages 5, if maybe a little 4, but I'm hoping 5 and 6 really are where you say you want to be. And as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about your overall organization, but you can also think about individual departments, because your overall organization may be compliance stage 3. But you may have departments that are exclusionary stage 1, a lot that are club, but you have some pockets that are farther along in maybe affirming stage 4. And so you can think of it that way. You can also think about different identity groups. So if we're focused on race, for people that identify as African American or Black or Caribbean American or from Africa, what would their experience be by climate and culture and policies, practices? Are their needs getting met, services? Well, what about Native American? What about Middle Eastern? What about Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, white? And then you can do the same thing with every other category of difference and just asking, folks that are assumed to be Muslim, folks assumed to be Jewish, folks that identify or assumed to be Christian, what are their experiences in the workplace? People are atheist, agnostic, so that's religion, spirituality. So you can do the same ask, organization, department, or by category of difference, and it can be really powerful. So what I want to do is just go over the key kind of definitions, and we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and I'll talk about in more depth what the model is, help you learn it, and then we're going to where we're headed is, I want you to be able to, maybe in a half hour or so, move literally to the place in the room, and your psych coordinator will say, there's stage 1, over here is 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 is aspirational, by the way. At least when I talk to the authors, they say they've never seen one, but it's like, ooh, it's where we could be. I'm going to be asking you to literally move to where you think the current state of the organization is, which stage best reflects that. So just kind of breathe in this. This is their definition, and I think it's only fair. Actually, these are their goals. Eliminating all exclusion and equity, baseline. And everybody's responsible for doing that. People held accountable for doing that. Recognize value, but maximize. So it's not just let's get you all here, but how do we maximize the benefits of all the differences and perspectives and life experiences and privilege and marginal identities, so that we can create, revise policies, practices, programs, services, meet the needs, support success, increasingly diverse populations of the clients we serve and the staff and the leaders we're attracting and retaining or want to. And how do you prepare members to be effective leaders in this 21st century? How do you prepare your clients to be effective leaders, community leaders, and if you work in K-12 or college right now as well as out in the world? And so my hope is by now, these words are rolling off your voice, because I've probably said create policies, practices, services 20 times by now, and I believe repetition is a key to learning. And when you can say all this without having to think about it, then you know you've already been teaching it and you're ready to teach, and you're probably modeling what needs to go. What I want to do is, if you, this is their definition, and on page 14, I'm just going to slowly go through each of these 6. And as you look around the room, what I'd like you to do is, as I do each one, go, 0 to 10, 0 not at all, 10 completely. Where is the organization today? And you get to decide at this moment if you want to think about the entire organization, because you might be in an organization with 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people, and you're like, given where I am, I have no idea. So you may want to look at your department or your division. And as I read each one, I'm going to pause and then say 1, 2, 3. Again, I'd like you to hold up your fingers or give voice to, or both, 0 to 10, where do you think? So just take a moment and think, do you want to look at the whole organization, or do you want to be focused on your area and department? And site coordinators, just real quick, well, actually, I'll do it. If you're going to be looking at the whole organization, kind of wave your hand to people or say something. And if you're going to be looking at just your department now, say something or wave your hand so that people kind of get a flavor. All right, take a deep breath. So their definition, 0 to 10, how clear a commitment to creating an inclusive organization does your group have? Your department, your organization. Clear commitment. Everybody understands it. People talk about it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And look around. Take a deep breath. 0 to 10. Seeks, develops, and values the contributions and talents of all employees at all levels and areas of the organization. All. 0 to 10. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Look around, notice. Take a deep breath. Includes all members as active participants in decisions that shape the organization. All members are active participants. Now, that doesn't say that everybody makes the decision and we stay in the room till we have pure consensus. But it does say that all members get input, especially if they're involved in implementing it or they'll be impacted by it. And there are many ways to gather input, and leaders seriously consider from many perspectives. So, includes all members as active participants in decisions that shape the organization. 0 to 10. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Look around. Take a deep breath. I'm going to do this in 2 parts. Employees reflect diverse social, cultural groups throughout all levels of the organization. So remember that full breadth of differences, all levels of the organization. We're talking about demographics here and positional power and type of job. So employees reflect from 0 to 10, 1, 2, 3. Scan, pan, see what you're noticing. Take a deep breath. And the second half of this, employees demonstrate the multicultural competencies to serve the increasingly diverse client populations you serve and want to attract. So what level of cultural competence are people demonstrating? It's not that they know or they believe they do. Day to day, they are demonstrating cultural competence to really serve the increasing diversity that you are serving. 1 to 10. Sorry, 0 to 10. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Look around. Deep breath. Just 2 more. This is their definition of a multicultural inclusive organization. Acts on its commitment to eliminate all forms of exclusion and discrimination within the organization, including, and you can fill in all you want, racism, sexism, heterosexism, disability oppression, ageism, classism, religious oppression, xenophobia. Just keep breathing. Acts on its commitment to eliminate. From 0 to 10, 1, 2, 3. and scan and just kind of notice what your colleagues are saying. And final one, does your organization from 0 to 10 not at all completely follow through on broader social and environmental responsibilities to create equity, inclusion, fairness, access to resources, success outside of the organization as well? Local, community, region, national, international, follows through on their broader social environmental commitments. 1, 2, 3, and then pan the room. Take a deep breath. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to turn to someone you're sitting near. And if you have a new person you haven't talked to, that'd be great. And share any reflections or impact from rating each of these parts of the MCOD definition. And you can still have the definition in front of you, page 14. So you just want to take a moment to collect yourself and just turn and share for 2 or 3 minutes. And then I'm going to have a break. And so we're going to come back in about 12 minutes. But if you want to talk for 5 or 6 of those, and then take a break, that's fine. But we'll start in about 12 minutes. All right. Turn and talk to a partner. We'll start in about 4 minutes. About 4 minutes we'll start. If folks can start coming back to their seats, we'll start in a minute. Come on back to your seats. Five, four, three, two, one. Come on back. Take a deep breath. What I want to do now is share with you an overview of the model, high level, and I'm going to give you a chance to learn it and teach each other. And then we're going to, as I mentioned, have you then move to where you think the current organization is, begin to have a little bit of that conversation so you see what it feels like. Because again, you can replicate all these activities as you just continue to bring more and more people into this conversation. And so the MCOD model has 6 stages. Each 2 are a different kind of coordinated group. So there's monoculture, exclusionary, and the club. And what's similar about these is there's exclusion, almost intentional or maybe not quite so intentional, but it really privileges the privileged group and has very few folks, in marginalized identities, and they're really treated as tokens. In compliance and affirming stages 3 and 4, the focus is on non-discrimination. It's still a monocultural organization, but leaders and employers are more concerned about compliance, not getting sued, doing just the bare minimum we need to do, or affirming, let's create a welcoming environment, let's get some more folks with marginal identities, but the status quo is maintained, people have to fit in. I rarely see organizations get any farther than non-discrimination. But some organizations are really working, and there are pockets that are what the authors called multicultural, and today they might call inclusive or socially just. I asked Dr. Bailey Jackson a few years ago, and he said 40 years ago, multicultural was an incredibly revolutionary term. If they were writing it today, they might call it inclusive social justice. And that's really what we've been talking about. Everybody is skilled up, accountable. You hire towards folks that everybody's infusing equity inclusion into everything they do. Now, when we were training this one time with Jamie Washington and Vernon Wall, Vernon said, we need one-liners. And actually, that could be a fun activity for if you're going to develop a cadre of people who are going to then train and teach this to the rest of your organization. They could come up with their own one-liners, and it shows that they've learned the model. But we came up with these. Exclusionary is like, no way. We created this for us. It's our way, no other way. The club, our way or the highway. We let a few more people in, but only if you do it our way. Compliance, the letter of the law, whatever accreditation, legal requirements, it's a letter of the law and nothing more. Affirming organizations, we welcome diverse candidates, and I just hate that term. It implies that everyone who's already here, A, it doesn't have any diversity, but B, we're the normal, and so anyone that's different from us, you're the diverse candidate. As you get to multicultural inclusive organizations, inclusion is central to our daily success, our daily practices, and we live values, we live our practices every single day. So as you're teaching this to others, people learn in different ways. You can give an overview, some stories, these one-liners, because we're trying to get people to get the model in them enough so that in larger and larger conversations in your organization, they talk honestly about where they think the organization is and why, so that we get more voices involved and honestly in hearing each other. Now, the indicators are on pages 15 and 16 in your handout. I'd encourage you to have these in front of you. What I want to do now is just give you a brief overview of each of these stages, 1 through 5. 6, again, is aspirational. And then I'm going to have you in small groups teach each other, particularly 2, 3, and 4, because I want to give you some interactive experiences since people learn differently. Nobody really wants to believe there's any exclusionary in their organization, maybe at least leaders probably don't. And yet it's very common that an organization looks and feels like this. Monocultural, everybody has to look and act the same, mostly privileged group identities or who get hired. And if you notice even at this graphic, people all are saying the same thing because that's what the leader wants to hear, but all the ideas aren't helping to solve the problem because we're also focused on maintaining this oppressive, restrictive membership, maintaining the dominance of our group over all others. There's discriminatory, harassing comments addressed, behaviors that go unaddressed. I get to so many campuses and I'll hear these stories of just incredible sexual harassment or homophobic harassment. I'm hearing more harassment towards people who seem to be undocumented, racial harassment. And what people will say is, but they bring in a $5 million grant. You know, they're good friends with the dean. So overt dynamics are happening all around us. If you're not addressing them, it's probably a clear indication. Or, you know, we go to HR, but then nothing gets done. And I mean, not that you don't hear anything, but literally nothing gets done. It's unsafe and dangerous for people in marginal identity. And there's just one way to do things that's very monocultural. And so fraternities and sororities, golf clubs historically were created for the privileged group identities. Many are still maintaining that oppressive culture, but not all. Now, stage 2, again, we're still in monocultural organizations, but the club, now even though it looks the same, there are slight subtle changes possibly. They may not be quite as explicit. The oppression may not be as in your face. You have to be much more aware of the subtle dynamics, like code words, like they're not very professional, or you're on a search committee and someone says, I'm not sure they're a good fit. Heard this story literally yesterday from the senior diversity officer. Full inclusive hiring practice, woman of color was top candidate, and now leaders in that organization are saying, because the number 2 was a white man, and they're like, well, he went to a better school than she did, a much more prestigious university. And so the very common club, you change the rules, we'll hire, that's not who we wanted. Yeah, we want token, but not that much at that high a position. And he's my friend. And so how do we get him in? Very common dynamics. And if you are members of marginal identities, you have to have credentials that are way beyond what people in the privileged identities have. So monocultural norms, there's only one right way. It's our way, business as usual. The dominant culture is not talked about. It's just infused in the business is how we do it. And you're engaging issues of diversity, but only to the level of the comfort zone of members of the club. And if they start to get any uncomfortable, where it's a club, you're like, yeah, that's not going to go over here. That's a little too much for us. And it can be an old boys club, a white club, any kind of hierarchy, privileged identity, the club. Now, compliance, I like this graphic because we have a few more demographic differences, and people might be at some tables, usually lower in the organization. So you might have some different perspectives, but again, the problem is still usually the leaders only want one answer. At compliance, you still have to fit in. You still literally have to look the same. And so they're committed to removing some of the discrimination, because now we're moving into the non-discrimination 2 stages. And they give some more access to previously excluded groups, but there is no change in the culture, the climate, the mission, the practices, how you make decisions, how you supervise. And clearly, if you're in a marginal identity, do not make waves, do not offend or challenge dominant group members, particularly leaders, or you may not be here long. And so, yes, we're changing the profile, but it's at the bottom of the organization. And you have to be team players and qualified. So if people are still talking about qualified minority candidates, which again, incredible trigger terms, they may not even be a stage 3, but those are clues that they have not moved very far towards early inclusion around stage 4. Again, don't rock the boat, and do not talk about oppression. You can talk about bias, maybe removing anything that's non-discriminatory, make sure we're non-discriminatory. Let's do a Title IX training. Let's have some festivals to celebrate our differences. So the programming is food, fun, festivals, holidays. You want to look good for the board, to donors, and so your websites. A friend of mine, African-American, when they were new to a college, first-year student, their picture was on the website. It was predominantly white campus. 15 years later, they went back, and their picture is still on the website. And so that's a pretty good example indicator. We want to look good, and so we actually present a better picture to the world than actually the climate inside. Now, some organizations do move to be affirming, and I love this graphic about it. You are welcome to join us. Come on. But you notice that the puzzle itself is a white puzzle piece. And so you have to be like us. We're not changing very much. You have to come fit in. But, come on along. We welcome you. It's not, we want to create an environment that's belonging, welcoming, and you can succeed. It's like, you're welcome to join us. And so we welcome diverse candidates. So there's a little more demonstrated commitment to eliminate discrimination. That practice discrimination. Let's get rid of that. That advantages men over women, that advantages cisgender over trans. All right, let's get rid of that. Let's shift it just enough so that we don't get in trouble. You are more actively recruiting, so you might be advertising in different websites, different papers. You may be reaching out, going to conferences, and really wanting to bring in people who've historically been denied access. At stage 4, you're doing more trainings to support the career development, the development of folks, but it's still a deficit model. It's like the folks with marginal identities, you need some help to be able to fit in here. And we want, professional development. So there might be mentoring programs. There might be trainings for people in marginalized identities, women in leadership, people of color in leadership. But you still have to be non-oppressive that's all you're talking about. Don't don't say this word, be non-oppressive. We value diversity here, anti-bias trainings, but they're not doing, let's look at the privilege group memberships, how privilege is embedded into everything we do, and let's disrupt that. They might be doing microaggression trainings, but they're not saying how is our culture and our policy and our systems perpetuating microaggressions. It's at the individual level at stage 4. Organizations say often they are stage 5, and then once we get into the workshop, they're like, ooh, especially as we get into part 2. But stage 5 organizations would be saying something like, we're committed to hiring a racially diverse, culturally competent staff leadership group and to serve the increasingly diverse clients we have, and everybody will be held accountable. And so this graphic, while it still is a little corporate-y, there are different perspectives. And if you look close, there are different group identities, not a complete list, but more. And they're in transition. They're looking at the goal of stage 6, actively working, moving beyond non-discriminatory to proactively inclusive, creating an environment that values and capitalizes on our diversity. So all those definition pieces that are present, the leaders are moving towards it, inclusion change teams, whole organization units to fulfill and ensure that full inclusion of everybody. And we're skilling up people to really question our policies, our practices. So it's not just an idea, but people are getting trained to do it. And they're empowered. People at the lowest possible place in the organization are empowered to notice what's going on, shift. Sometimes customer service folks at the point of contact, if there's a mistake, are authorized up to a certain amount, $150, $200 to make it right. So you're redistributing power and authority. People are included in decisions, really trying to get participation empowerment. That's stage 5. So take a deep breath. So when I did the webinar a couple weeks ago, I extroverted a position announcement that I think would have been at stage 5, and people asked for it. So here it is. I don't have it in the packet, so you may want to take pictures of this if you're not going to be purchasing this. So could you imagine, this is what every job description, when you post it, says. It's on your website, and all your leaders are saying this all the time. Mid-level managers are saying this, and all employees know this is what we're about. Our organization is committed to creating equitable, inclusive work environments to support the success of the full range of our employees. You might be hearing stage 5 in this, right? We believe that employees who feel valued, respected, will create policies, programs, practices, and services to effectively meet the needs and exceed the expectations of our increasingly diverse customer populations. So this is just part 1 of this. This is almost saying, here's what we value, right? And this is more closely to what's often on position descriptions, but they often just say, we encourage diverse candidates to apply. I just hate that. So instead, consider, we encourage candidates to apply who have demonstrated capacity to create inclusive work environments, work effectively on increasingly diverse teams, and serve the increasingly diverse clients of our organization. We are committed to hiring and retaining a racially diverse, culturally competent staff at all levels of the organization who not only reflect the demographics of our clients, but also continue to deepen their skills and competencies to serve the full range of our customers. So just take a breath, breathe this in, and imagine. This is what stage 5 looks like. How close are you to this? So we've talked about the continuum. You can read about stage 6. It's really what I'm just talking about. Everyone's doing inclusion all day long, all the time. It's just how we do business. And I want to show you one way to teach this experientially, because giving information, as I just did, is not my preferred style of learning or teaching. And I want to show you a way that people can be teaching each other the model. And so one way, especially if you have a large group, 30 plus, you could divide people up into 6 groups, 1 for each stage, and assign them a stage. Give them a chart of paper, some markers. Gives them some time to reflect on the indicators from pages 15, 16. And then they go to the chart and they write up, what would the stage look like in our organization? What would people be doing? What would the policies, practices, how would they be feeling? What are our demographics? And to help prompt them to think about this, you can give them the handout. It might be there. on page 17. So the demographics, what are the competencies? Because each stage would have a different answer. What's the culture like? What are people doing? Privileged, marginalized identities and common decision-making, professional development, supervision, recruitment, retention, what would be going on? And so you could have them at a stage for the first time. I'd have them there 4 to 5 minutes because they're still learning. They're still getting used to writing, and then they have to write things up and they're discussing. Try to get a couple examples, maybe a couple stories, that no names, of course. And then you move them in a stations activity to the next stage. Give them a couple minutes to read what's there, look at the indicators, and then maybe add a couple. And you move them through all 6 stages. Now, 5 and 6 are relatively the same, but there's got to be more conversation there because most people have no idea what it looks like. Another way to do, and then you bring people together to talk about where do you think we are, and I'll do those activities in a minute. So what I'd like you to do right now is, in Psych Coordinators, help do this, please. Get into groups of 3. And when you're in that group of 3, I want you to just choose number 2, 3, or 4 each. So within a group of 3, there's one number 2, one number 3, one number 4. When I'll give you about a minute to do that, and then I'll tell you what to do. So 30 seconds to make sure everybody's got a number, either 2, 3, or 4 in the group. And if there's a group of 4, you can just choose one of the other numbers, 2, 3, or 4. 2 people can work on it. All right, take a deep breath. So have your packets on pages, I believe it was 15, 16. Double check. What you're going to be doing is, for about 3 minutes, I'm going to give you quiet time, and please honor people's learning style. Just be really quiet in the room. If you got assigned 2, you're going to be looking at stage 2. So that's on page 15. You're going to look at the indicators. I've already talked them through. I've given you a couple examples. But now you're going to be thinking about, generic examples. What would it look like at stage 2 in an organization, either ours or another one? You can talk thematically and or a couple examples from your past, or without names, what could be going in the organization now, but please do not use this to talk about any person or any department. Make them anonymous, generic. You're going to need to be prepared to teach your stage to your partners. If your number is 3, on page 15, you'll be looking at the compliance organization. If you're 4, looking at the affirming organization. So it's all on page 15. And what you're going to be doing, and I'll tell you now, you're going to start 3 minutes just to reflect and what would be going on. And if it's useful to look at this slide, what would the demographics, what would demographics of leaders, the competency of leaders be? What would be the morale or conflict? How would it be handled? Some of the unwritten rules. If you're in a meeting, common behaviors. My guess is if you're in the club, in your common behaviors, you'll see people in privileged groups interrupting people in marginalized, taking their ideas as their own, conflict not being resolved. I'll stop there. I don't want to give too much away. And decision making. So you can talk about this sort of thing, or if you just have a couple examples that you think reflect the indicators. In about 3 minutes, I want you to be able to have the indicators and say, at stage 2, here's what this would look like, and here's it's tied back to what it says on page 15, the indicators. If you're feeling confused, Psych Coordinators might be able to come around and help. So just kind of 3 minutes of quiet time, and be prepared to share and teach your stage to your 2 colleagues here in a minute. All right, 3 minutes, go ahead. You're about halfway. Kind of finish up your notes. You have about 20 seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. So what I want to do now is give you a chance to share that. And so in your group of 3, I'd like the person that did stage 2 first to go. And you're going to have about 3 minutes to share a story or two, or just some patterns of if someone was coming in and didn't know your organization, this is what they would see. And site coordinators, I'd like you to help them keep time so that every 3 minutes you say, can you move on to the next one, and move on to the next one. So it'll be total, 10 or so minutes total. So people doing stage 2, start sharing your insights. And you don't have to be perfect or know it all. Just have everybody looking at page 15 and learning together. So you have about 10 minutes, and then I'll come back in. This is halfway point, halfway point. You should be talking about stage 4 now. Make sure you're doing stage 4.
Kathy,
Yep.
I just wanted to pipe in real quick. You do have a question both in the chat and in the Q&A, just in case you wanted to take a minute to review those while they're finishing up and then maybe address them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Please finish your last thoughts. Finish your last thoughts. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just take a deep breath and thank your group for helping each other get a little more knowledge about this. Got a question that I'll address now, and because it's about stage 5, which is where we're headed. In that they said the indicator list on stage 5 redefining organization, it says values and capitalizes on diversity, but that feels like a stage 4 to them. So first I want to acknowledge that when you want to learn this model so you can teach it, to be able to say how is one stage different from another is pretty advanced. And so if you have a small group of facilitators that are learning to do this, having that ability to do that and play with each other would be a really useful thing to do. I think it does is stage 5, and here's why. I think a stage 4 affirming would say we value diversity and we want you to be here. We welcome you here. Stage 5 not only has demographic diversity at all layers of the organization, but capitalizes on it. So you could have someone in an entry-level position, but has experience and or life perspectives on a certain topic. And you're like, let's bring them to the executive team meeting. We're talking about X. And who else might be able to and want to be a part of this conversation? Again, they may not make the final decision, but we capitalize on the input, the ideas, the life experience, the knowledge of people. So I hope that was helpful. And your earlier question was, are these dynamic? I've never thought about that. I have updated the language on stage 5 a bit to be more active, because once folks said this feels like it's a passive, and I want to make sure you understand that redefining is active. And to do that, I have a couple ways to teach people that I'm going to have you do it. If you look at the continuum that I have up here, you could think that, your compliance is just a little bit, you move into affirming and you're in stage 4 affirming, and it's really easy to go into redefining. But in actuality, what it actually looks like is this. It's a huge leap, and I'm not even sure that's far enough a distance, but it feels like a leap over a canyon. And that in fact, significant shifts have to be made on many levels. And so imagine, what would you be doing? What would people be feeling at a stage 5 or 6 redefining inclusion? What would equity, inclusion, what would the principles, if they were operating, what would people be doing? And quick story, as a university had me come in to work with a group of folks that have been teaching this model for several years to each of their divisions. And they'd go in, they'd work with the head of that division, the department, to learn the model. So they taught it together, got it in the line of supervision. But we don't know what stage 5 looks like. So when you come and work with our unit change teams, help us know what it looks like. And I was like, what I did was, because that meant I'd never seen one. When I sat down and given my 30 years of the time of work, I said, what would it look like? So please turn to pages 18 and 19 in the packet. And for now, I'm only going to have you look at leadership, A. When you have more time, you may want to review the whole packet. It's not comprehensive, but it's not a bad start. As you think about your department or the whole organization, check off any of these behaviors. These would be demonstrated. You'd see leaders doing these. Which do you see leaders in your organization doing? And if you're a leader yourself, you may want to go through and say, which ones am I doing? Check off what's already in place and star those that are easy to implement. Now, notice the change management here. We're not saying what people aren't doing. We're focusing the energy on what could be easy to implement, and it helps move forward. So just take about 2 minutes, read as much of pages, I think it's 18 to 19, and just notice what goes on in your body as you're reading what I believe leaders would be doing in a redefining inclusive organization stage 5. So kind of finish up your reflections. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. What I'd like you to do is just kind of look around, and folks, just kind of raise your hand if you're like, I think we are demonstrating these every day, all the time. My guess is not many hands went up. But if they did, I'm excited. Site coordinators, here's what I'd like you to do. Just have two people share briefly reactions, impact of looking at, beginning to see the indicators that I believe would be everyday occurrences in a stage 5 organization. So just take 1 minute to collect up two quick voices. Go ahead. Okay, finish your conversation. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. Even when I review these, when I'm teaching them, I don't live up to all these in my own personal life as much as I want to. So they're aspirational, but we have to get leaders competent and ready. And if you flip through the rest of the pages, the next few, we're talking about how they do planning, how supervisors do very similar things, how we do hiring, how we do performance management. And we'll talk a bit more about these strategies in more detail in part 2. Leaders don't tell you what to do, they show you how it's done. So in phase 1, it is critical that leaders are looking at their own behavior, they're showing up in ways, they're modeling the future of what they want done, and they don't make mistakes. And if they do, they have the skills to acknowledge them, repair, and make a commitment to not do it again. Because if you have leaders saying we want to move forward, but they are daily activities that are modeling different behavior, they're talking the talk but not walking the walk, then this organization is not going to have much change at all moving forward. I want to show you 2 more activities that can help organizations understand what stage 5 is and imagine, because it's really hard to get. And so you could pull the same group back together for further conversation and have you come and talk about an organizational practice or policy, program, service that was not helpful, supportive of your needs as and what barriers and obstacles that created for you and the negative impact it had on members of that marginalized identity. And so you could have people each reflect on this and then come back and have that conversation. Or if you have, 3.5, 4 hours to do this workshop, or you break it into 2-hour sessions, you might be able to then warm people up to tell that story, because we're trying to get people to think at the systems level, which is a hard thing to do for many people. You might also have them tell a story about who was at the table and come and share an example of a recent decision they made, who literally was involved physically, who was virtually involved, whose input did they use, what additional input did they realize, if we had slowed down or asked this or had these folks involved, we may have had a better decision. And how could you get buy-in? How did you and how could you? And I think it's through getting people's input, open forums, a chance to give ideas, chance to literally be at the table, to have the conversation. The leaders may make the decision, but to get more voices at the table. And so having your leaders and inclusion change team think about this could help them realize, I may not be at a stage 5 because I made a decision this way, and a decision at stage 5 would look more like this. So activities that might be useful to you to help people think about what stage 5 looks like. What I'd like to do, though, is have you take your packets and please turn to page 28. That's what I want to focus on. What you have there, are what I call the group identity cards. And this activity, when I'm doing this workshop live, helps people get, oh, I get a little bit more what stage 5 would look like. Every single day, people would be using the full breadth of differences, whether they're using the group identity cards or just keeping all these identities on their screen. And every policy decision that we're making, we're saying things like, who would this idea be useful for? Whose needs are getting addressed, but who would have extra hurdles or barriers? And what groups might unintentionally be negatively impacted by this decision? So if you notice the group identity cards, I think there's 28 or 9 or 30 different categories of difference. And there's one that says credit, non-credit. And so if you're in an educational system, that will make more sense to you. If you're in a for-profit or a nonprofit, you may want to change that one to revenue generating and back office. But in K-12, especially college, if you're serving students academically, you're considered making money. And if you're everything else, you're back office in the marginalized identity. I'm going to give you a policy. And what I want you to do is think, by group membership, whose needs would be met, and maybe who would have extra hurdles or who would not get their needs met with this policy. Full breadth of differences. So if you don't happen to have the packet, I'll pop the slide back up. I want you to think about bereavement. And in most organizations, there's a policy that you can have paid time away. And so in this one organization, they said that you can only go to funerals if it's your immediate family member for paid time. Now, you can go to funerals and anybody you want, so long as you're working pretty well, but you have to take vacation time if it's not an immediate family member. And I think what they meant by that was pretty much nuclear family and maybe grandparents and that sort of thing. So just take a moment. And if you just want to turn to one other person and think by group membership, and actually site coordinators, why don't you do this? Let people reflect for a moment, but then just brainstorm group memberships that might be negatively impacted by the bereavement policy and see if you can collect up 1 or 2 possible revisions. So instead of only immediate family members, first question, by group membership, who would find this a limiting barrier, almost discriminatory from their perspective? And what are 2 ways we could revise that policy to have greater inclusion? Just take a quick moment. Instead of 4, let's do 2 minutes, and then I'll come on back in. So about 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath. Whew. In a stage 5 organization, redefining, we're expecting and requiring, holding accountable all leaders, all employees to be able to revise, analyze policies, practices, and in the moment, while you're making decisions, while you're thinking about a service, to ask the questions: who are we serving? Who else are we forgetting? Let's pull out the group identity cards. You can Xerox those, single-sided. I like to do it on cardstock, any bright color, but not green. So yellow, orange, pink, blue, whatever. Some people just do white or tan. Cut them up so everybody gets their own stack, and you can have them literally in every meeting in the center of the table. If people are doing virtual meetings, everyone in front of them. Who are we serving? Who are we forgetting? That is a critical element of stage 5. It's critical people learn the model so they're able to have the conversation, and understanding stage 5 literally helps people go, oh, we're not there yet. And so I warned you a couple times. What I'd like you to do is take a deep breath, take your indicator sheets. I believe that's 15 and 16. And I'm going to ask you now, with the psych coordinators, are going to have you move to the stage that you feel best describes the current state of your organization. Now, if you all happen to be the same department or division, you can focus on that. Or if you want to focus on the larger organization, if you're a nonprofit of 4 people, I'd focus on the whole organization. And please remember, there are no wrong or bad perspectives, that everyone's voice is going to be critical and seriously considered. Now, this activity can be done, in 20 minutes, but I would think 30 to 45 you want to make sure you have. And so bringing the same group back together to let them reflect where we are, and then come back and maybe repeat what we're about to do, and then more deep conversations. Because what I do literally right after this activity is I then introduce the handouts and activities we'll do in part 2. And so if you'll be staying with me, then have people do this, give them a couple weeks off, and then come back for people that are live now, May 17th. And then you can redo this activity and then move people in to think about strategically, how do we move forward? So I hope that gave you enough time to choose. Site coordinators, we're encouraging people to be brave and to start a conversation that matters. And I'm going to ask you to move. So if you could just invite people to leave where they are, and then show them where each of the different stages are, 1 through 6. 6 is aspirational. And take 30 seconds to have people move. What I'd like you to do now is just turn to one other person that you're near and share what stage and why. Just a couple minutes. Not talking to the whole group. You just turn into somebody and say, I'm this stage and here's why. So go ahead, just a couple minutes. Kind of finish up your conversation, please. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take a deep breath. Now, what I want you to do is just look around and see where people are. And how about right now, if you said we're in exclusion stage 1, raise your hand. And if you notice you're not by others, maybe want to glance, move over. If you think you're the club, raise your hand or nod. Make sure you're kind of near each other. Compliance, who's kind of compliance? Now, right about now, when I'm leading this live, folks will say, well, can we be a 3.5 or a 3.75? So if you're going to be leading this workshop, I let people do that because I do think there's gradations. And then see if some folks said word affirming, stage 4, and if folks think we might be at 5, redefining. When you do this and you maybe pull this group back together to have much more conversation about why you're where you are. But before I have you do a little bit of that, I want to ask you what lens you were using to make this decision. Many people use a race lens, and even with that, more of a black-white lens. There's no right or wrong, but you need to be aware that, oh, I was thinking about kind of cisgender men and women and the experience of cisgender women mostly in sexism. And I wasn't thinking about transphobia, or I was only thinking about Latinos and Blacks. I wasn't thinking about Asian American, Native American, or I didn't even think about people with disabilities. And there might be somebody that says, actually, that whole list Kathy has, I kind of did a and was holding all of that. So when you have more time, you could ask the next questions, which could be, so if there are people in our organization that identifies trans or gender nonconforming, or what would they say we are? And what do you think our climate and culture is? Is it higher or lower than where you currently are? Or folks that are Middle Eastern and Arab, our clients or people who are working here, what would they say? Or people that are assumed to be undocumented? What would people who are first level in the organization, administrative support staff, custodial, where would they say? People with high school degrees compared to if you have people with, say, college or master's or doctorates. You do the same thing. People that are lesbian, gay, bisexual, where would they? And just, it can be useful to do several of these. And I like to have people move, because what happens is most of the time is folks move to a lower number with each one of these specific categories of a marginalized identity. And then I say, so if you keep moving to lower numbers, how can you be a 4, right? So this is a little more complex. The first time you teach this, you may or may not want to delve into this level. But that's what I would recommend if you're working the organization. So I already had you talk about, with just one other person, what do you see and experience, and why did you choose this stage? If you had more time, if you're listening to this, the recording, you may want to give small groups 10 minutes to just sit with each other and share and relate in and share different perspectives. What I'd like to do now is have the site coordinator just take a couple minutes and see if people be willing from their perspective to say, I'm thinking we're a stage 3 compliance, and here's 1 or 2 reasons why, and maybe somebody else a 4, and maybe if you have any 2s or 1s, and you don't have to do it necessarily in any order, but a couple minutes just to hear maybe 1 or 2 comments from each of the stage groups that you actually literally have in front of you. And I encourage people to choose bravery and no right or wrong, and just share why you thought, what indicators would have you think. So just take a couple minutes to do that, please. just about one more minute to collect up from the stage groups. About 30 seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. Take a deep breath. Whew. And just look around and thank everybody for moving in to begin this conversation, knowing you can pull people back together, enlarge this group to continue the dialogue. So go ahead and go on back to your seats if you'd like. And as you're moving, here's what I'd like you to do is imagine. Could you imagine your organization if all your leaders had the capacity to understand the multicultural organizational development model, to understand and the capacity to talk about vision and where we want to be, the ability to bring in your diversity council, your managers, other change agents if you're working in a more complex organization, and have everybody in the same room having ongoing authentic conversation, looking at data, looking at examples of policies and saying, where are we? And getting a shared understanding. That is phase one. And at that point, and you all are probably feeling this already, it's like, well, what do we do and how do we fix this? What's next? Well, that's really what I'll be doing in part two. Your leaders are going to be wanting quick answers and maybe quick solutions. I'm generalizing a bit. Culture change is a long-term process where you have to develop the internal capacity. And so phase two is the focus, building internal capacity through trainings, through more focused work, and we'll be covering this in part two in more detail, but developing maybe cadre facilitators or trainers. What I'm calling inclusion practitioners is a whole nother approach. I'm actually have a masterclass for inclusion practitioners I'm running now to develop the capacity of a single person in every unit that has a deep well of multicultural competencies that can partner with a leader to work with unit change teams, divisional change teams, as well as help the leader lead more effectively. Setting up clear expectations and accountability, which we started to do on this, and then comprehensive professional development programs. So that are the times, these are what I'll be talking about in part two, in how do you develop internal capacity in phase two of the model. Now, phase three of this LCY cross model is then how do you really systematize this, infuse equity, inclusion, in everything we do. We'll be doing that part two. About hiring practices, onboarding, performance management, supervision. Now, we won't be able to go into depth and detail, but to start to really broaden, what are the policies and practices? How do we build this into everything we do? Every promotional practice, you built it in. I was just talking to someone that's doing a diversity certificate, and I said, so what are the competencies you're moving towards? And they kind of turned their head and looked at me like, I hadn't thought of that. Now, it's not their department that's doing it, but they're like, no, it's just you have to attend these programs. At stage 5, inclusive organization, even at 4, affirming, we're getting much more clear of the competencies and capacities we want to hire to, train to, hold accountable to. And so every HR training is infused with equity inclusion, and all the diversity equity trainings are very intentional. All the hiring processes are very intentional. The competencies we want, not what school did they go to, who do they know, and can they teach chemistry? Yes, necessary to teach chemistry, necessary to know budgeting. It's necessary, but sufficient would be, and how competent are they to demonstrate every day a capacity to create equity inclusion in everything they do. That's what we're doing at a stage 5. So we'll be talking in Creating Inclusive Organizations and Cultures Part 2 about that. If you want something in life you've never had, if you want an organization that's different than what you got to do something you've never done. And it can feel this scary because you may be sitting there, maybe 1 or 2 people in the room, maybe you signed up by yourself to take this and you're like, I don't know who else will work with me on this. Well, you can get access to this recording. I'm offering it at a discount at half price, so it's, I think, $247, so that you could lead this workshop, have me leading the workshop. You just pull people together, and so you don't have to have the pressure responsibility to do it. Though after today, with these handouts, you're like, I can do this. But we have to get people realizing this is a huge leap. You can do it step by step, but we have to do something we've never done. And sometimes the only mode of transportation is that leap. And I was looking just the other day at these other penguins. I'm writing a story of, well, the ones on the 3 together, and they're like thinking, what is that person doing? And I don't think I'm following. And yet I hope some of the activities today help the group that you're working with to say, wait, here's where we are, and I think we can move forward. Now, what do we need to do? That's part 2. And it'll get more folks willing to take that risk and ready to do it. Again, on the front page of my packet, I always in these offer that any of my books you can download for free in PDF form. You can be sharing these with a lot of people, having them, it helps readiness to be talking about navigating difficult situations or dynamics of racism and the roles of whites, or keeping self-care and community care in the forefront. If you're live right now, next week, May 3rd, I'll be doing my free webinar on the topic of Creating Inclusive Organizations Part 2. So what we do next, how you do phase 2 and 3, that's what we'll be talking about. And again, my webinars are lots of information sharing, some Q&A, and then I do a virtual institute like today where I'm leading the workshop. And so if you want to learn how to do this, or you're like, I want to be a participant in it strategically, or we don't have as much capacity to lead this yet, so let's do the virtual institute. That's the reason I have similar information, just in a different format. And May 24th, I'll be doing an open Q&A. Anybody from part 1 or part 2 can come together to ask even more questions live for that hour. And again, we record those, the free webinars also. You can get those at kathyobear.com/events. If you're wanting more in-depth work around other issues, in June and July, I'll be doing foundational equity inclusion training, again, a webinar and institute, and these are the dates for it. Your site coordinator will be getting lots of emails from me, but if you also want them, you can just sign up for anything. You can download one of the books that'll get you onto my list, and so you'll get regular information about how to participate in these. If you want, I don't have time today to answer any chats before 1, but I'll stay on a few more minutes and be glad to see if anybody wants to stay, and I'll answer a few questions. But what you'll do, if you type them in, I'll make sure I answer them in the Q&A in May 24th. And even if you can't attend, you can listen to it and make sure your questions are answered. If you want to work with me much more intensely, I have several key programs I just want to highlight. I mentioned the Masterclass for Inclusion Practitioners. We're in the process of that now. You can join at any time. It's a 12-week virtual course, Fridays, noon Eastern. We're live for 90 minutes, but they're all recorded. So if you miss some, people get access to some of my videos, lots of resources in the moment, and prep to learn how do you help create organizational change, deal with difficult dialogues, navigate policies and practices that aren't meeting the needs. So this workshop we did today helps raise awareness of the need. The Masterclass for Inclusion Practitioners is really designed at phase 2. How do you get 5, 10, 13, 20, 40 people embedded in your organization in individual units who have the capacity to work with the leader to move forward? Now, I'm working now with, I think, 16 people in a year of transformation. And so if you're interested in doing what I do, knowing what I know, and having access to anything I've ever developed, done, and anything we can develop together, senior diversity officers, senior leaders, as well as consultants and trainers, or people that want to start a business, want to have a coaching business. People have many different needs, and we're coming together in a community to help you deepen your capacity to do transformational leadership. And that's very exciting. I'm opening up to probably bring in only 4 or 5 more people over the next month or 2 at the most. So if you're interested, just send me an email. And finally, I work with just a handful of organizations to do comprehensive professional development. And so if you're wanting an external consultant to partner with you and get 30 seats in the master class, a year of transformation, senior executive strategic work, as well as all these virtual institutes as a part of the package, and this ongoing consulting and training, let me know. And I'm, again, talking to people, and I'm just taking a select few organizations. I'll end with President Nelson Mandela. What counts in life is not the mere fact we've lived, in my opinion. It's a difference we've made to the lives and our people in our organizations and those we serve. Across the full breadth of difference, that will determine the significance of the life we're leading inside an organization. My hope is that you see a few ideas that you can take and share, a few activities you can lead in your unit, a few behaviors at stage 5 you can start doing, because as more and more people start living into stage 5, we then can organize people to do the internal change in phases 2 and 3 that's possible. So thank you for joining me for part 1. I hope you join for part 2. And again, that's next week, or May 17th will be the Virtual Institute. And again, if you've got questions or dilemmas, please put them in the chat. I'm going to pull up the chat right now and see what we have. Someone said, before you go, could you provide data points about participants? How many? I'm not sure what that question means. If you were to do this in your organization, for this workshop that I just did, I'm thinking 15 to 30 might be nice. 15 feels a little small because you are asking people to move and claim where they are. I've done it with 150 in the room, co-facilitated, and with Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, who also does this work if you're looking for a consultant or trainer to bring in. That's what I would suggest. In the chat room, if you're still here, are all the different websites, web links that I just spoke about, I think. So how many people for today? I would ask you to think about what container can you hold? Because as a site coordinators, you're moving people in and out. And for this workshop, you notice, especially that from 1 to 6, if you're running it yourself, you want to be there for probably good 20 minutes. And that's when people can start disagreeing, and people could say things that are microaggressive, like, how could you think we're exclusionary? Or you think we're 4? How, so there could be some personalized comments. And so I'd make sure site coordinators have more facilitation and engagement tools and skills. Much more than 30 or 40. Most people I know, that's a large group to manage, but if you can and you want to have 2 or 3 facilitators, that's what I'm thinking. Much smaller than 10, unless it's an executive team. Now, you could take this recording, have the entire executive team, because they may be saying, we don't want to share this in front of other folk. That's a whole nother conversation. It's an indicator they might be a stage 2, early 3, maybe. But I meet people where they are. And so if there's 6 or 8 or 10 people in an executive team, 4 or 5, and they want to do this by themselves first before they then do it with others, I think this workshop could help them get this more in them. And if you're asking them to help teach you, be in the room and help speak to the model when their entire division or department is asked to do it, I could imagine doing that. It would just have a different energy to it. I think I answered all the questions. So I'll stay just a couple more moments in case anybody has any, either in the Q&A or the chat room. That's where I am. Someone did ask, will you be offering part 2 at another time? The webinar is always available on DrKathyObear.com /events. You can always download that recording. The actual Virtual Institute again, you can purchase that, but I won't be doing the part 2 webinar live. I'll just do that once live, but then you can always watch it. And then someone also asked, I'd love to do this with student leaders. So whether those are RAs, which means resident assistants, orientation leaders. So this person asked from kind of a higher ed perspective, but if you're a community organization, you might have peer advisors, peer mentors, working with youth. And so I think it's possible. My language and technique was probably for learning styles of folks who are used to this kind of training. And I'm not sure all people in high school and college are used to this kind of training. And so you may want to adjust to their learning styles and what they're used to. They may not like the PowerPoints, what I'm saying. The model may not work for them, but they can think about 0 to 10. But I think RAs, resident assistants, orientation leaders could easily learn this model. You may want to give them, if you email me, I have a chapter that I co-wrote with Dr. Shelley Kerr from the University of Oregon and how we use this model in a student affairs group to create unit change teams. And so you have in the packet several of the articles from the authors and then how I used it. So if you have people maybe do a little pre-reading, I think that'd be useful for people who are leaders and change agents as well before a workshop like this. And clearly, I think RAs would have lots of stories, and I think it'd be a phenomenal conversation. I just might break it up over a couple sessions because I'm not sure you have 3 hours with them to do this kind of work. So a couple 2-hour sessions, you build in some of the part 2, it could be really fun. All right, I hung out a few more minutes. There's no more questions. So let me again thank you. And if you have other questions you'd like me to be doing in the Q&A, even if you're not able to attend, just email them to me and I'll do good about collecting them up. And I look forward to seeing you in future webinars and future virtual institutes. And thank you for your work in the world. All right, all the best to you. Take care.